Okay, so here we are. We are going through the Bible in a year. And we're doing it from what we call 30,000 feet or on the train at 230 miles an hour, watching it go past pretty quick. In other words, we're not doing it line by line, word by word, syllable by syllable. We're doing it chunk by chunk by chunk. And we're hoping by doing it that way that we're going to understand the whole of Scripture. We're going to understand the whole story. And so as we're building the whole story, we will end up going back and finding some of the themes that we did in the beginning and show how they go all the way through. But right now, we're just setting it up so that we can understand the whole Scripture. We can understand the whole story. So where we are now is in a book called 1 Samuel. Now, there's also another book called 2 Samuel. Why 1 Samuel and why 2 Samuel? Well, really, probably just because when they were one book, it was just too long. So you divide it up. So 1 Samuel is one of the history books in the Old Testament. There's various kinds of literature in the Bible, right? There's historical books, there's biography, there's prophecy. And some of that prophecy is eschatology, which means the study of last things, like the book of Revelation would be that. There's correspondence, there's poetry. And so we're in the Old Testament history books, 12 of them in 1 Samuel. Why is it called Samuel? Well, you would think that it's named after some guy named Samuel, but who is Samuel? Well, when we come off of the period of the Judges, there's priests and there's prophets in the land. And Samuel was this young boy who was born. His mother couldn't have children. And she was distressed, and she used to go and worship, and the priest prophet said to her, you're going to have a child. And sure enough, she did. But she had told the Lord that if you give me a child, I will give him to you so that he might serve you all the days of his life. And so this guy, Samuel, he's serving the Lord since he's young, since he's a young boy, not just a young teen or an adolescent or a young adult, but a boy. And he's serving under the prophet Eli, because that's the prophet that had spoken to the lady. Hannah was her name, and she had the child, and had the child named Samuel. And so he's the priest there in Shiloh, and Samuel is born. And she brings the boy, and he grows up there in the home and the ministry of Eli. Well, Eli has some boys, and his boys are pretty brutal. His boys take advantage of women, they take advantage of offerings, they're not serving the Lord, taking advantage of everybody, being quite abusive in a lot of different ways. Well, the Lord actually tells Samuel, the young boy, one time, what he's going to do to these sons and how he's going to bring judgment on these sons. And the Lord uses this boy, Samuel, to tell Eli that's going to happen. Well, sure enough, it happens. And, Eli's not good with it, but he's good with it. If you know what that means. And so that's in 1 Samuel, that's chapters 1 through 4. Sort of Eli, the priest, prophet, Samuel, he's born, Eli's sons, who they get replaced really by Samuel. The Lord judges them, and they get the warnings, and they're going to die. So then we get to chapters 5 through 8 in 1 Samuel. And here we have the Ark of the Covenant is restored, because so much of what the children of Israel had done when they were in the period of the Judges, when they had no king, and God was their king, but they're just sort of going crazy. At the end of the book of Judges, it says each one did what was right in his own sight. Well, one of the things is that underneath the ministry of Samuel, the prophet, is that the ark is restored to its rightful place. And there's a little bit of a victory, and there's a little bit of a revival that goes on under Samuel. He's bringing the nation back to some spiritual worship, to the worship of God, to the acknowledging of God. So he's doing a good thing. And it's in this period that Israel asks for a king. And we had done this previously, so if you want to go back and look at that, you can. Israel asks for a king, and Samuel's upset about it. He's like, I don't want them to have a king. We have a king. The king is God. And God said, don't worry about it, Samuel. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. And he said, this is what's going to happen if you get a king. He's going to want taxes. He's going to tax your life. He's going to tax your food. He's going to tax everything about you. He's going to turn your sons and daughters into slaves and all that kinds of other stuff. And they're like, no, we want to be like everybody else. So the Lord uses Samuel to anoint Israel's first king. Well, kind of the first king. I asked this question in church one time out loud. I said, so who is Israel's first king? Of course, looking for the response to be Saul. I said, who is Israel's first king? And somebody shouted out, God. Yeah, exactly. The first king was God. First earthly king, though, is this guy Saul. And so Saul, he becomes Israel's first king. So 1 Samuel 1 through 4, sort of the story of young boy Samuel. 1 Samuel 5 through 8, Samuel's getting his place and bringing spiritual life and really not wanting the king. And now we get to chapters 9 through 15 in 1 Samuel. And this is where Samuel goes out and anoints Saul as the king. And there's a lot of stuff going on, even in this early thing with Saul, that makes you wonder, what's going on with this guy? What's going on with him as king? And does he want to be king? Does he not want to be king? What's going on? And so he seems to be, a little bit iffy right from the beginning. Well, he goes out and he works a victory, so that's great. The people are excited about that. They like the victories. They like being free. They like not having any enemies. They like that he's a military leader, that he's bringing peace to the land. He becomes the king. And then he doesn't follow the Lord. He doesn't follow the Lord. Even though he has some earthly victories, even though he's the king, even though he's the one that was chosen by the people, he doesn't listen to God. And they were supposed to do some sacrifices. Samuel was supposed to come and do the sacrifices, and Samuel doesn't show up on time, at least on Saul's timeline. And so Saul goes about and he makes the sacrifices. And one of the things about Saul is he's not listening to God. He's not listening to God's timeline. He's not listening to God's commands. He's not obeying God, and he's presumptuous. And he just goes ahead and does the things he's not supposed to be doing. Well, it's starting to crack. Saul, but then he goes again and he defeats the Philistines, and but he's supposed to destroy everything lest they come and they be snares in their life later. But he doesn't do that either. He obeys, but he doesn't obey fully, and there's going to be a price to be paid for that. And so it gets to be a bit much. Saul is. He's on the way out, and you find in chapters 16 through 31, you start to find the story of David, who will be the king, but chapters 16 through 31, you see Saul had a son. We didn't get to that one. His name is Jonathan, and Jonathan was on fire for the Lord. He has this one phrase where he says, nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Let's go just see what the Lord will do. Just a courageous guy. And he became really good friends with this young guy named David. And so chapters 16 through 31, and we'll come back to this guy, David and Jonathan, 16 to 31, David, he's the one who does the well-known David and Goliath story. He goes out and he kills the giant. And Saul and his forces, they can't do it. And this young kid, David, he comes and does it. So now all of a sudden, David is a big hero. And as David is the big hero, Saul is getting jealous because he wants to be the big hero. He wants to be the one that gets everybody's praise and everybody's adoration. And so he's not going to like David, and he starts to seek after David, and he wants to kill David. And his son Jonathan becomes good friends with David. And so David flees, and Saul's hunting him down. He hunts him down into the crags and into the caves and into the trees and into the forest and into the desert. He chases this guy down. He wants to kill him. And the Philistines, the enemies of God, they end up giving David refuge. That becomes sort of an unusual story. We might take a look at that. It's sort of important, plays into things importantly. Saul, he's going from bad to worse, and he starts to consult evil spirits. He calls on the witch of Endor. He wants to know what's going on, and so he consults evil spirits, wanting to consult the dead. And it's going to be the end of it. It's going to be the end of him being king. God's going to exit him. And then David, we'll see what happens with David. David will ultimately become the king, and we get to chapter 31, and Saul dies. So 1 through 4, sort of the young boy Samuel. 5 through 8, Samuel as the priest and the prophet and the judge. And then 9 through 15, Saul as the first king. And then 16 through 31 is David as the hero, and Saul not liking it. So that's that story, and we'll pick it up, and let's move along, and we'll start to put some things in its place in between those chapters 1 through 31 of 1 Samuel. Hey, bless you guys. Let's move along and see what happens next.